The piano in the corner of the Red Garter saloon had 2 dead keys and a coating of stale beer, and Josie Barrett knew just how it felt. She finished her song, a sad, slow thing about a river, and held the last note until it was clean and perfect. It was the only clean thing in the room. The note hung in the air, silver and bright, over the smell of sweat, wet wool, and cheap whiskey. Then the applause started, a ragged sound of calloused hands and drunken approval. Josie smiled. It was a smile she owned, but it felt like property all the same, just like the blue velvet dress that was cut too low. And the room's upstairs. "Sing it again, Josie," a miner shouted, slamming his cup. "You ain't got the money for that one again." "Milt!" she called back, her voice slipping from silver song to saloon gravel. The men laughed. She moved through the small crowd toward the bar, a hand brushing away a stray grasp at her waist, her eyes scanning. Tom Wintry was watching her. He always was. He owned the Red Garter. He owned the building, the liquor, the tables, and the piano. And he believed, with a certainty as deep and cold as a Wyoming winter, that he owned Josie Barrett. He was a thick man, with a waistcoat that strained over his belly and a smile that never reached his damp. Assessing eyes, he treated her like his prize mare. He'd show her off. Let men look. But he was the only one who held the lead rope. He'd paid off her debts in Cheyenne, a fact he mentioned every time she asked for $1 of her own pay. "You earned your keep tonight, girl," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. He poured a shot of whiskey and pushed it toward her. Josie looked at the glass. "I'm tired. Tom, I'm heading up." "You'll head up when I say." His smile was thin. "Drink. A man likes to see his property enjoy the spoils." Josie picked up the whiskey. She looked at the amber liquid, then at Tom Wintry's reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Her jaw was tight. She brought the glass to her lips and took a sip, the fire of it a familiar, hateful burn. "That's a good girl," he murmured. Later that night, the saloon was quiet. The last drunk had been thrown into the street. Josie was in her small attic room, a space so cold the water in her pitcher had a film of ice. She was counting the coins she'd palmed from a table. 3 dimes and a nickel. Not enough to get to the next town, not nearly enough. A sound cut through the silence. A muffled thump from the room down the hall, the one Wintry kept for his special inventory. Then, a sound that made Josie's blood stop. A girl's cry, sharp and then choked off. Lucy, the new girl from back east, she couldn't have been more than 17, with eyes that still expected kindness from the world. Josie was at her door, her hand on the knob. She waited. Another thump. A man's voice. Wintry's. Low and guttural. Josie had spent 2 years learning to survive. Surviving meant looking away. Surviving meant locking her own door. Surviving meant letting the dead keys on the piano stay dead. But the sound that came next was not a cry. It was a small, broken sound of surrender. Something in Josie Barrett snapped. She didn't grab a weapon. She didn't have a plan. She just moved, her bare feet silent on the cold floorboards. She threw open the door to Lucy's room. Wintry was there, his back to her. He had Lucy pinned against the wall, one hand tangled in her hair, the other ripping the front of her nightdress. Lucy's eyes, wide and terrified, met Josie's over his shoulder. "Get out, Josie!" Wintry growled, not even turning. "This ain't your concern. Let her go. Tom." Josie said. Her voice was quiet, deadly quiet. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Or what? You'll sing me a sad song?" He turned then, shoving Lucy to the floor. "I told you, girl. You're my property, and so is she. Now get—" He advanced on Josie. She didn't move. He grabbed the front of her thin wrapper, pulling her close. His breath was hot with whiskey. "You're getting brave. You need a reminder of who runs this place." He pulled a small skinning knife from his belt. "Maybe a little mark," he whispered. "Somewhere the customers won't see." He moved fast. The knife flashed. Josie twisted, a searing, white-hot pain slicing across her ribs. she cried out, stumbling back. He lunged again, but his foot caught on the rumpled bedclothes. It was all the time she needed. Her hand, scrambling behind her, found the heavy porcelain water pitcher on the washstand. When Wintry straightened up, she swung it with every ounce of strength she had. The sound of the heavy ceramic hitting his skull was dull and wet. He dropped like a sack of feed, the knife clattering to the floor. There was a moment of absolute silence. Josie stood, panting, her hand pressed to her bleeding side. Lucy was sobbing in the corner. Wintry didn't move. Is he dead?" Lucy whispered. Josie didn't check. She didn't care. "Get dressed. Get out. Don't go to the marshal. He's Wintry's man. Just run." She didn't wait to see what Lucy did. Josie ran to her own room, her side on fire. Blood was already soaking the thin cotton. She grabbed her performance dress, the blue velvet, and pulled it on over her chemise. It was the warmest thing she owned. She grabbed her thin cloak. She knew she couldn't use the front stairs. She scrambled out her attic window onto the shallow roof of the porch, her bare feet slipping on the icy shingles. The drop to the ground was a good 12 feet. She didn't hesitate. She hung from the edge and let go, landing hard in the filthy alley mud. The impact sent a jolt of agony through her ribs. She choked back a scream. The stable was behind the saloon, Wintry's prize bay. A fast, strong animal he never let anyone else ride was in the first stall. Josie was no horsewoman, but she knew how to stay on. She threw a blanket on its back, fumbled with the bridle, and led it into the street. She hauled herself onto its bare back, her leg dragging in pain. She kicked the horse hard, and it shot forward. She rode out of town at a dead gallop, with no supplies, no food, no gun, and a shallow knife wound across her ribs that was bleeding freely into the blue velvet. She didn't look back. Behind her, the town of Laramie slept, ignorant and cold. Ahead of her was nothing but the Wyoming wilderness and the moon. She rode for 2 days. The first day was a blur of adrenaline and panic. She pushed the horse, Wintry's bay, harder than it had ever been pushed. She rode north, toward the mountains, away from the railroad, away from the telegraph lines, away from anything that looked like a town. The wind was a knife, and the thin cloak was useless. Her hands, bare, cracked and bled from the cold and the grip on the horse's mane. The first night, she collapsed in a dry wash, huddling against the horse for warmth. She was afraid to build a fire, afraid the smoke would be seen. The bay was a good horse, and it seemed to understand her desperation, nuzzling her with a warm, wet nose. Her side was a constant, throbbing agony. The velvet dress was stiff and black with dried blood. She tore a strip from her chemise and tied it tightly around her ribs, a makeshift bandage that did little. The second day, the hunger began. It was a gnawing, hollow pain that sat on top of the sharp pain of her wound. The horse was tired. Its steps became a slow, plodding march. Josie's head was light. She saw rabbits, but had no way to catch them. She found a creek, broke the ice with a rock, and drank the freezing water. It made her stomach cramp, but it was wet. She saw the sky change. The flat gray light of the morning curdled into a dark, bruised purple in the west. The wind picked up, carrying the first stinging needles of snow. A storm was coming, a real one. She urged the horse on, into the foothills, looking for shelter. A cave, an overhang, anything. The snow came faster, thicker, a blinding white curtain that erased the world. The bay stumbled, whinnied in protest, and finally, it just stopped, head down, sides heaving, exhausted. Josie slid off its back, her legs buckling. "Go on," she whispered, slapping its rump. "Go!" The horse didn't move. She would die here. The thought was strangely calm. She'd fought so hard, but this was the end. She left the horse and pushed forward on foot, pulling the cloak tight. She was walking into a wall of white. She couldn't feel her feet. She couldn't feel her hands. Even her side had gone numb. She fell. She got up. She fell again. She saw a dark line of trees ahead, pines, a shadow against the white. She crawled toward them. She made it to the base of a large pine. its low branches offering a pitiful shelter. She curled into a ball, the snow already drifting over her. The blue velvet was a mockery. She thought of Tom Wintry's face when she hit him. She hoped he was dead. The world went quiet. The cold was almost warm now. A soft, heavy blanket. Josie Barrett closed her eyes. Levi Cutter did not like strangers. Strangers meant town, and town meant trouble. His land, high on this remote mountain ridge, was his sanctuary. He'd built the cabin himself, log by log. He lived a quiet life, trapping, hunting, and minding the silence. It was a life he had earned, paid for with a past he worked hard to forget. He was checking his trap lines, moving through the storm with an ease born of long practice. The snow was coming down hard. It would be a bad one. He was thinking of firewood and the stew he'd make when he saw the color, a patch of dark blue, almost purple, against the white snow near his southern line. He stopped. His hand went to the knife on his belt. He listened. The wind was the only sound. He moved closer, rifle ready. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a wolf. It was a woman. She was half buried in a snowdrift, curled up like a child, one hand tucked under her cheek. She was wearing a fancy dress, a saloon dress, torn and filthy, dark with what he instantly recognized as blood. Levi's first instinct was to turn around. He had seen women like this before. They were trouble, they were bait, and they always brought men with guns. He had enough ghosts. He didn't need new ones. He stood over her for a long minute. She was breathing, barely. Her exhales were small, frosty puffs. She couldn't have been here long. He cursed, a low, harsh sound that was stolen by the wind. He could not leave her. The code he lived by was his own, forged in violence and loss. But it was not merciless. He slung his rifle, bent down, and scooped her up. She was lighter than a sack of flour, all bones and wet velvet. He hefted her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry and started the long, hard walk back to his cabin. She was a dead weight, and the snow was getting deeper. He kicked open the door to his cabin and deposited her on the floor by the hearth. Not gently. He didn't want her on his cot. He went back, barred the door against the storm, and turned to look at what he had brought inside. She was a mess. Her hair, a dark red, was matted with ice and dirt. Her face was pale, waxy. Her lips were blue. He built up the fire, the flames licking high. He grabbed a rough blanket from his cot and threw it over her. He filled a pot with snow and set it on the hook to boil. She woke up with a gasp, her eyes flying open. They were green, and for a second, they were wild with terror. "Where am I?" she croaked, trying to sit up. She scrambled backward, crab walking away from him until she hit the wall. "Don't touch me." Levi stayed where he was, by the fire. He was a big man, and he knew his size was frightening. He was broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his collar, and a face that was more Comanche than white. He'd seen that look of fear before. "You're in my cabin," he said. His voice was a low rumble, rough from disuse. "You were half frozen on my land. Stop moving. You'll make yourself sick. Get away from me," she hissed. She was all instinct, a cornered bobcat with nothing left but its teeth. He noticed then how she flinched, not at him, but at the sudden crackle of the fire. He'd moved a log, and she had recoiled as if expecting a blow. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "I've heard that one before." Her eyes darted around the small, one-room cabin. It was sparse, a cot, a small table, 2 chairs, a stone hearth, and shelves of supplies. Clean, orderly, male. She saw his rifle leaning by the door, and her eyes fixed on it. Levi saw her look. He walked over, picked up the rifle, and methodically began to clean it, his back to her. It was a signal. He was not a threat, but he was armed. "You're bleeding," he said, not looking at her. He'd seen the stiff, dark patch on her dress. "I'm fine." She clutched the blanket to her chest. Levi sighed. He put the rifle down and turned. He ladled some of the hot water into a tin cup and slid it across the floor. "Drink." She stared at it. It's water, or would you rather go back outside? She snatched the cup, her hands shaking so badly she spilled most of it. She drank the rest, greedily. He went back to the fire. You need to get out of that dress. It's wet. You'll catch your death. You'd like that, wouldn't you? One less mouth to feed. Her voice was sharp. A weapon. Levi almost smiled. She had fire. This one. You're bleeding on my floor. Let me see the wound, or I'll throw you out in the storm right now. He was bluffing. She knew it. He knew it. But the threat was there. She glared at him, a long, calculating look. Finally, she lowered the blanket. Fine, but you touch me, and I'll kill you. You can try, he said flatly. He grabbed his small medical kit. He knelt beside her. Turn. She turned her back, her shoulders rigid. He untied the laces of the velvet dress, his rough fingers clumsy on the small knots. The dress fell open. Underneath, she wore only a thin, torn chemise, soaked in blood. The makeshift bandage was frozen stiff. This will hurt, he said. He ripped the frozen bandage off. Josie screamed, a raw, high sound that she cut off with a bite of her lip. She slumped forward, but he caught her. Hold still. His hands were impersonal. He cleaned the wound. It was shallow, just as she'd thought, but long, an ugly red line across her ribs. It was already infected. Who did it? He asked, his voice low. Does it matter? She said through gritted teeth. Town. She just shook her head, her whole body trembling. I'm not going back. He finished bandaging her, this time with clean strips of linen and a smear of pine pitch salve. I don't care where you're from, or where you're going, but you're on my land. He stood up and went back to the fire. I've got rules. You're here, you eat my food. You help when you're able. When this storm breaks, you leave. Suits me, Josie whispered, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. She was exhausted, but she watched him. He was a dangerous man, not like Wintry, not loud or greasy. This man was quiet. He was like the mountains, cold and silent and capable of sudden violence. Levi looked out the single, small window. The snow was a solid, swirling wall of white. It was already halfway up the door. Looks like you're not going anywhere for a while. He was right. The winter storm settled in. A howling white siege that lasted for days. The wind shrieked around the eaves of the small cabin. A constant, mournful sound. The world shrank to the four walls of the small room. The tension was thick, a physical presence. They moved around each other like two wary wolves, never touching, always aware. The cabin was impossibly small. Levi slept on his pile of furs by the door, his rifle beside him. Josie had the cot, the wood pile, stacked inside against the wall. Dwindled. The food was running low. Levi cut their rations down to half, a thin stew of dried beans and a sliver of jerky, a small cup of weak coffee in the morning. The silence stretched, broken only by the howl of the storm and the crackle of the fire. Josie healed, but she stayed quiet. She watched him. She saw the way he moved, with a surprising, quiet grace. She saw the way he stared into the fire, his face hard and closed off. One night, the storm was at its worst. The wind sounded like a woman screaming. Josie was on the cot, pretending to be asleep. The fire was low, casting long, dancing shadows. Levi, on the floor, suddenly jerked awake. It wasn't a shout. It was a low, guttural sound, a name choked off by something terrible. He sat bolt upright, his breathing harsh and ragged in the quiet. Josie's eyes snapped open. She watched him. He didn't move for a long time. He just stared at the dying embers. His big shoulders slumped. Josie saw him in the firelight, and for the first time, she didn't see a threat. She saw a man in a pain so deep it mirrored her own. His mask of anger, gruff solitude was gone. In its place was something broken, something haunted. He knew she was awake. He didn't have to look. He could feel her watching him. Slowly, he turned his head. His eyes met hers across the small, dark room. It was a brief, charged glance. No words were spoken. None were needed. She had seen his ghosts. and he had seen her recognition. He turned back to the fire. The morning was bitter cold. The fire was almost out. Josie was shivering on the cot, huddled under the one thin blanket, her teeth chattering. Her velvet dress was ruined, and her chemise was not nearly enough. Levi was by the hearth, trying to coax a flame from the last of the embers. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. He stood up, walked to a wooden peg by the door, and took down a heavy coat. It was a massive, worn, sheepskin-lined coat that smelled of pine smoke, leather, and him. He walked over and tossed it onto the cot. It landed on her with a heavy, warm thud. "Put that on," he growled. "You're shaking the floorboards." Josie looked at the coat. It was an act of kindness, and kindness made her suspicious. It was a weapon she didn't know how to fight. She picked it up, her fingers brushing the soft, worn fleece inside. She pulled it on. The coat swallowed her. The sleeves hung down past her hands, and the collar came up to her ears, but it was warm, instantly, wonderfully warm. She buried her face in the high collar, and a small, sharp smile touched her lips. It was the first time he had seen her almost smile. "This thing's too big for me," she teased, her voice muffled by the wool. Levi didn't look up from the fire. He added a small piece of kindling, his face intent. "Better too big than not enough." The words hung in the air, heavy and true. Josie clutched the coat tighter. The storm raged on outside, but in the small, cramped cabin, the tension had just risen to a whole new level. The storm broke on the 5th day. It didn't end, but it paused, the wind dying to a low moan, the snow easing to a light, lazy fall. The world outside the cabin was pristine, white and deadly, piled in drifts 10 feet high. Levi opened the door, a wall of snow collapsing inward. He spent the morning digging a narrow path to the woodpile, his movements economical and powerful. Josie watched him from the doorway, wearing his coat. She was still weak, her ribs aching with every breath, but the fog of exhaustion was lifting. The gnawing hunger in her belly was a sharp, clear ache. "Give me the shovel," she said. Levi stopped, looked at her. The shovel was almost as tall as she was. "You'll bust your stitches." "I'm not made of glass. I'm just tired of sitting." She held out her hand. He looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes assessing. Then he handed it over. "Don't break my shovel." She began to clear the snow from the small window, working in short, angry bursts. The work was clumsy, and it hurt. After just a few minutes, she was gasping, leaning on the handle, sweat cooling on her face, but she had cleared the window. Light, watery, and gray streamed into the cabin for the first time. Levi came back inside, his arms loaded with wood. He didn't say "good job." He just nodded at the window. "It's brighter." That was how it began. Josie recovered, but her guard stayed high. She was a cat in a new barn, watching, listening, judging every small movement. She still refused to talk about her past, and Levi, to his credit, never asked. He didn't seem to care who she was, only that she was. Her strength returned, and with it, a restless energy. The cabin was a cage. To keep herself from screaming, she worked. She swept the hearth. She cleaned his few dishes. She learned to patch his torn shirts with a needle and rough thread, her stitches small and neat. In return, he taught her things. Not by teaching, but by doing, and expecting her to follow. "Fire's low." He'd grunt. "Wood needs splitting." He took her out to the wood pile. He handed her the axe. "Not like that. You'll take your foot off. Let the weight do the work." He stood behind her, his hand closing over hers on the handle. His presence was a solid, warm wall at her back. She flinched, a sharp, involuntary jerk. He stepped away, immediately. "Stand with your feet apart. Swing from the shoulder." His voice was gruff, impersonal, but his retreat was a statement. He had felt her flinch, and he had backed away. She took a breath, the cold air burning her lungs, and swung the axe. The wood split, clean. She felt a small, fierce jolt of satisfaction. He taught her how to check the trap lines. He showed her the rabbit snares, simple loops of wire, and how to spot the faint, brushed tracks in the new snow. When she saw the first rabbit, caught and frozen in the snare, her stomach twisted. "You eat or you die," Levi said, his voice flat. He showed her how to reset the trap. "Nature doesn't care about your feelings." "You're a real ray of sunshine, aren't you?" she muttered, her fingers numb as she fumbled with the wire. "I'm alive," he said. Their days fell into a hard, spare rhythm. He would hunt. She would keep the cabin, skin the rabbits, stretch the pelts, and keep the fire, the center of their world, alive. Their talk was curt, necessary. "More wood. Water's low. Storm's coming back." But the silence between them was changing. It was no longer a heavy, hostile thing. It was becoming a shared space. They would sit by the fire at night, the wind howling outside, and eat their meal of rabbit stew. A silence thick with things unsaid. One night, the fire was burning low, casting long shadows. Josie was stirring the stew, the rich, meaty smell filling the cabin. Levi was on the floor, cleaning his rifle, the metal pieces laid out on a piece of oilcloth. His saddle, a big, heavy Western rig, was sitting on a stand in the corner, its leather dark and oiled. Josie had regained some of her old spark. The color was back in her cheeks, and the haunted look in her eyes had been replaced by a watchful, sharp intelligence. She looked from Levi, broad and focused, to the saddle. "That's a lot of saddle," she said, her voice light, teasing. Levi didn't look up. "It's a lot of horse, I'll bet." She smiled, a small, genuine smile that lit her face. "Looks like you'd need a map to find the man sitting in it. It's too big for me, that's for sure." Levi stopped his work. The cloth in his hand was still. He looked at her, really looked at her, sitting on the floor by the hearth, bathed in the red firelight. She was wearing a pair of his old wool trousers, cinched at the waist with a bit of rope, and one of his flannel shirts. The sleeves rolled up a dozen times. She was still thin, but she was no longer frail. She was tough, like a willow branch, and the firelight caught the red in her hair. She saw the look in his eyes change. The teasing smile faltered on her lips. "What?" He didn't say anything. He set the rifle piece down, stood up, and crossed the 3 feet of floor between them. Josie's breath caught. She scrambled to her feet, but he was already there. He bent down, and before she could protest, he slid one arm under her legs and the other behind her back, and lifted her. She made a small, startled sound, like a bird. He carried her to his chair, the one he had built from logs and rawhide, and sat down, settling her on his lap. Just like that. The cabin was silent, deadly silent. The only sound was the pop and hiss of the fire. Josie sat frozen. She was on his lap, her back against his chest. His arms were loosely around her, his hands resting on his own knees. Not on her. He wasn't holding her captive. He was just holding her. She could feel the heat of him, a solid, living warmth that seeped through her clothes. He was so big. He smelled of pine smoke, leather, and the cold night air. His chest was a hard wall behind her, and she could feel the slow, steady beat of his heart. She should move. She should scream. She should hit him. This was what men did. They took, they grabbed, they proved their strength. But he wasn't doing any of that. He was just sitting, holding her as if she weighed nothing. "Levi," she whispered. Her voice was shaky. "You're cold," he rumbled, his voice low, his breath stirring her hair. "You're always by the fire, but your hands are always cold." He lifted one of his hands and covered hers, where it rested on her knee. His hand was huge, calloused, and unbelievably warm. She stared at their hands, his dark and rough, hers pale and small, marked with scars from the kitchen, and now from the axe. The silence thickened. It was no longer just silence. It was tension. It was a raw, heavy thing, pulsing in the air between them. He shifted, his thigh hard beneath her. She felt the movement, a jolt that went straight through her. He smelled her hair. She knew he did. She felt him inhale, a slow, quiet breath. Slowly, she turned her head. Her face was inches from his. His dark eyes were on her, unblinking. She saw the lines at the corners of his eyes. She saw a long, thin scar on his jaw. She saw the hunger in his look, a hunger that matched her own, but it was tempered by something else. A sadness, a control. He leaned in. She closed her eyes. She felt the brush of his lips, not on her mouth, but on her temple, a touch so light it was barely there. Then, his mouth moved toward hers. Panic, cold and acidic, clawed its way up her throat. She shoved, hard. No! She scrambled off his lap, stumbling, and fell to her knees on the hearth. She was panting, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was back in that room. Wintry's face was in front of her, his whiskey breath, his hand. She looked at Levi, her eyes wide with terror, her hands up as if to ward off a blow. Levi did not move from the chair. He didn't chase her. He didn't lunge. He just sat, his hands resting on his knees. The hunger was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, pained understanding. He looked at her, a half-starved animal, and his expression was full of a sorrow that mirrored her own. He said nothing. Josie stayed on the floor, trembling, until the panic receded, leaving her cold and ashamed. He just sat there, watching the fire, giving her the space to put herself back together. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay on the cot, listening to his steady breathing from the floor, and she hated him for his patience. The next morning, the cabin was cold. The fire was dead. Levi was already outside. Josie got up, her body stiff. She pulled on his coat, the familiar weight a strange comfort. When he came back in, his arms full of wood, she couldn't look at him. She busied herself making coffee, her hands shaking. "Josie," he said. She froze. He dumped the wood by the hearth and turned to her. He was just a man, his face rough with stubble, his eyes tired. "I'm sorry," he said. Josie's head snapped up. She stared at him. Sorry. It was a word she had never heard from a man. Not in earnest. Not when they were the ones in the wrong. I scared you," he said. He fumbled with the words. He was not a man for apologies. "It won't happen again, I promise." Josie just stared at him. She didn't know what to say. You're sorry?" "I am," he said, and his gaze was steady. She turned back to the coffee. It's all right." It wasn't, but it was a start. The truce held, but the air was different. The brief, sharp intimacy had been shattered, and in its place was a careful, awkward distance. A few nights later, Josie woke up screaming. It was not a loud scream, but a choked, terrified sob. She was tangled in her blankets, fighting an invisible attacker, her hands clawing at the air. "No," she whimpered. "Please, no! Arthur, stop! Stop!" Levi was on his feet in an instant, the knife in his hand, his eyes scanning the dark cabin. He saw her, thrashing on the cot. "Josie," he said, his voice sharp. "Wake up. You're safe." "Arthur, don't!" He crossed to the cot and grabbed her shoulders. "Josie, it's Levi. You're here." "You're safe." Her eyes flew open. She looked at him, her gaze unfocused, wild with terror. Then she saw him. She saw the cabin. She saw the knife in his hand. She recoiled, a small, wounded sound in her throat. Levi dropped the knife as if it were burning. "It's all right," he said, his voice gentle now. "It was just a dream. You're safe." She just stared at him, her chest heaving. She had called out a name. Arthur. He had heard it. He knew. He didn't ask. He didn't say another word. He just picked up his knife, went back to his furs by the door, and lay down. He did not sleep. He just lay there, awake, guarding her from the shadows. In the morning, neither of them mentioned it, but the name, Arthur, hung in the air between them. They were outside, checking the snares. The day was bright, the sky a harsh, brilliant blue. The snow was so deep it was like walking through a white desert. They had 2 rabbits. Levi was resetting a trap, his back to her. "Who was she?" Josie asked, the words popping out before she could stop them. Levi's hand stilled. Who? The nightmare. The one you had. You called out a name. He was silent for a long time. He finished setting the snare, his movements precise, before he stood up and turned to face her. His face was a hard, closed mask. My mother, he said. Josie's breath fogged in the air. What? What happened to her? He looked away, out over the vast, white expanse of the mountains. She was Comanche. My father was a white trader. He died. We lived in a small town in the Nebraska territories. People are how they are. He paused, his jaw working. They said I stole cattle. A boy, 17, with nothing. They said I was half-breed trash, just like her. A posse came to the cabin. They didn't find me. I was hiding. I watched. His voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. They took her. They dragged her to the big cottonwood in the center of town. They lynched her. For my crime. He looked at Josie, his eyes black and empty. I ran. I never stopped running. I changed my name. I came here, where there's no one, no towns, no pauses, no people. Josie's own pain, her own fear, felt small and selfish in the face of his. She stepped toward him, her hand half raised. She wanted to touch his arm, to offer some comfort, but she didn't. Levi, she whispered. Let's go, he said, turning away. It's cold. The confession, raw and brutal, changed everything. He had given her a piece of his broken past. He had trusted her with the why of him. That night, she took the pan of stew from the fire. He was sitting in his usual spot, on the floor, leaning against the wall. She ladled a bowl for him, and then one for herself. Instead of going to the cot, she sat on the floor next to him, not touching, just near, close enough to feel his warmth. They ate in their usual silence. This is good, he said, his mouth full. It's the same stew we've had for a week, she said. It's better today. Josie looked down at her bowl. When I was, before, I used to sing, in the saloon. He grunted, his way of saying, go on. There was this one song about a gambler who loses everything. He's at the table, one card left, he bets his boots, and he loses. Stupid song, Levi said. It is, she agreed. But the piano player, old Milt, he was always drunk, and one night he hit a note so sour, a dog in the street started howling. The whole saloon just stopped. And I looked at Milt, and I said, I think you just invented a new key. Milt, the key of G-flat for God-awful. Levi, his spoon halfway to his mouth, stopped. A strange sound rumbled in his chest. It was a rusty, unused sound. He was laughing. It was a short, harsh bark of a laugh, but it was real. His face broke open, the hard lines softening, and he was, for a second, a different man. Josie smiled. A real, wide smile. It's true. Your trouble, he said, his eyes crinkling. You're just figuring that out, she said. He shook his head and went back to his stew, but he was sitting closer now. Their shoulders were just barely brushing. The thaw had begun. The next day, she was washing. She had heated water, a luxury, and was washing her chemise and Levi's shirts in a wooden bucket. She had stripped down to her other chemise, her only other piece of clothing, and was standing near the fire, trying to stay warm. Levi's coat was her shield, but she had to take it off to work. She was acutely aware of her own body, of his presence in the small room. She scrubbed the clothes, her back to him. Her wound was itching, a sign of healing, but the bandage was old and needed changing. She finished the washing and hung the wet clothes on a line she had strung near the ceiling. The cabin was filled with the clean, sharp smell of lye soap and damp wool. She stood by the fire, her back to the flames, trying to get warm. The thin, worn chemise was practically transparent in the firelight. She crossed her arms over her chest, feeling naked. Your bandage, he said. She turned. He was holding the small medical kit. I can do it, she said, her voice too high. "It's in a bad spot. You'll pull the stitches. Sit down." It was an order, but his voice was not unkind. She hesitated, then sat on the small stool by the hearth. He knelt in front of her. He was so close. She could see the flecks of gray at his temples, the way his dark eyelashes rested on his cheek when he looked down. "This might be the last time," he said. "It's healing clean." His hands were gentle. He untied the old, soiled linen. She sucked in a breath when the cloth pulled at the healing skin. "Hold still," he murmured. His fingers brushed her skin, just below her breast. It was a clinical touch, a doctor's touch. At first, he cleaned the wound, his touch light. She watched his face, his dark, thick hair, his strong, broad hands. He was focused, but then his hand, the one not holding the cloth, came to rest on her waist. Just rested there, his palm flat against her skin. His fingers splayed. To hold her steady, his thumb moved, a small, slow, circular rub on her skin. Josie's breath stopped in her throat. She didn't pull away. She didn't flinch. She just watched his face. His eyes, dark and heavy, lifted from her wound and met hers. The cabin, the storm, the whole world fell away. There was only the heat from the fire, the heat from his hand, and the heavy, aching need in his eyes. He leaned in, slowly. He was giving her time to run. She did not run. She met him halfway. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate. It was a kiss of two people who had been starved for too long. Starved of warmth, of kindness, of touch. His mouth was firm, chapped, and tasted of coffee and the wild. He deepened the kiss, and it was slow. A question. A discovery. His hand moved from her waist, up her back, his fingers tangling in her damp hair, holding her head as his mouth explored hers. She kissed him back. She was needy. She put her hands on his shoulders, clinging to him, her fingers digging into the rough wool of his shirt. This was not Wintry's greedy, wet mouth. This was not Arthur's demanding force. This was Levi, and it was a kiss of equals, a kiss of survivors. He pulled her closer, his other arm wrapping around her, lifting her from the stool, pulling her against his chest. She could feel the hard, solid muscle of him. She could feel his heart hammering against hers. His hand slid from her hair, down her neck, over her shoulder, his thumb brushing the strap of her chemise. And then he stopped. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. His eyes were closed. Josie was trembling, her body aching for something she hadn't even known she'd lost. "Levi," she whispered. He pulled back, just enough to look at her. His eyes were dark with a desire so raw it made her shiver. But he was holding it back, with a control that was almost painful to watch. He was holding it back. "Josie," he said, and his voice was a low, hoarse rasp. "Not like this." "What? What do you mean?" He set her back on the stool, his hands on her shoulders, holding her steady. "You are not a meal for a starving man. You are not payment for shelter." He took a step back, running a shaky hand through his hair. If it happens, it will be because you choose it, not because you're scared, not because you're grateful, not because you're trapped here with me. You deserve to choose." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "Fully. You deserve to choose fully." Josie stared at him. The man who owned nothing, who lived in a box on a frozen mountain, had just given her the entire world. He had given her a choice. Tears, hot and sudden, pricked at her eyes. She, who had not cried when she was beaten, or when she was starving, or when she was freezing to death, felt the tears spill over. "Josie," he started, looking panicked. She shook her head, a small smile on her lips. She reached out, her fingers tracing the scar on his jaw. "You," she whispered, her voice thick, "are the first man who ever asked what I wanted." That kiss changed the air. The small cabin, once a prison of snow and tension, became something else. It became a haven, Winter did not release its grip. If anything, it deepened, the world outside turning into a landscape of impossible, sculptural white. The snow piled up past the window, and the wind was a constant, high-pitched scream. But inside, the fire was always lit. Inside, there was warmth. They no longer slept apart. The first night after the kiss, the silence was thick with question. Josie lay on the cot, and Levi lay on his furs by the door. After an hour of listening to each other breathe, he stood up. Josie's body went rigid. He didn't come to her. He just picked up his pile of furs, crossed the small room, and laid them on the floor right next to her cot. He said nothing. He just lay down, his back to her. It was enough. It was an offering of presence. She lay on her side, looking at the broad, strong line of his back, just a foot away from her. She could feel his heat. She could smell the pine smoke on his skin. She slept, for the first time in her life, feeling utterly, completely safe. A new intimacy, quiet and physical, grew between them. It was not the desperate, hungry thing from before, but something slower, more solid. It was in the way he would hand her a tin cup of coffee in the morning, his fingers brushing hers, and neither of them would pull away. It was in the way she would pass him by the hearth, her hip brushing his shoulder, a casual, easy touch. They learned the map of each other's presence. She learned the sound of his breathing when he was asleep. He learned the way she hummed, a low, tuneless sound, when she was mending his clothes. They shared a world that was only 8 paces long, and it was becoming full. One afternoon, while Levi was outside checking a snare, Josie found a piece of birchwood he had set aside for kindling. It was smooth, the grain straight. She picked up his skinning knife. He left it for her now, when he was gone, a silent offering of protection, and she began to carve. She was not skilled. Her fingers were clumsy, but she was patient. She worked for 3 days, in the quiet moments when he was out, or when he was sleeping. She carved the wood, whittling it down, smoothing it with a piece of sandstone from the hearth. When he came in on the 3rd day, stamping the snow from his boots, she was sitting by the fire. He set a rabbit on the table. "It's cold," he said. "It's always cold." She replied. She held out her hand. In her palm was a spoon. It was lopsided. The bowl was too deep, the handle a little too thick, but it was sanded smooth, and it was whole. He looked at the spoon. He looked at her fingers, which had 2 small, fresh cuts on them. He took it. He did not say thank you. He just turned it over in his big, dumb, rough hands, feeling the weight of it. Then he hung it from a leather thong on his own belt, next to his knife. The next night, he sat by the fire, but he was not cleaning his rifle. He had a piece of thick buckskin, an awl, and a needle with heavy sinew. He worked for hours, his hands, which he had seen split a log in one blow, moving with a surprising, gentle precision. The stitching was tight and even. He finished, and he held it out to her. It was a sheath for her knife, the one she'd taken from Wintry's stable, a knife she had just realized she'd lost in the snow when she fell. She looked at the sheath, and then at his face. She had no knife. He understood her look. He reached into his boot and pulled out a smaller knife, one she had never seen. The handle was bone, worn smooth. "My mother's," he said. "For skinning, it's better." He slid the small, sharp blade into the new leather sheath and handed it to her, handle first. She did not say thank you. She just took it, the leather still warm from his hands, and looped it onto her own rope belt. It felt heavy. It felt right. That night, the unspoken thing between them, the thing they had been walking around, finally came to a head. The stew was eaten. The fire was high, a roaring, bright column against the force of the wind. They sat on the furs before the hearth, Levi leaning against the log wall, Josie beside him. The cot was cold and far away. He was just looking at her, not with hunger, but with a kind of quiet wonder. He reached out and touched her hair, his thumb brushing a strand back from her face. "You're beautiful," he whispered. The words sounded rough, unused. "I'm not," she said. her voice shaking. I'm just me? That's what I mean. He leaned in and kissed her. It was the kiss she had been waiting for. It was slow. It was emotional. It was a promise. He kissed her eyelids, her temples, the scar on her jaw, and then her mouth. She opened for him, her hands coming up to frame his face. She felt the roughness of his stubble, the strength of his jaw. She was choosing this. She was choosing him. His hands moved to the laces of her shirt, his shirt. His fingers fumbled. She smiled against his mouth and unlaced it herself, pulling the worn flannel open. The firelight hit her skin. He looked at her, at the long, pale line of her ribs, at the pink, healed scar. He traced it, his finger gentle. He marked you, he growled, a low sound of anger. It's just a scar, she whispered. It's not me. He kissed the scar, a soft, warm press of his lips that sent a shiver through her entire body. He eased her back onto the pile of furs, his body half covering hers. He was heavy, solid, and safe. Josie, he said, his voice thick. Are you sure? I'm sure, she said, and pulled his mouth back to hers. It was slow. Every touch was a discovery. He unwrapped her like a gift, and she unwrapped him. She learned the feel of his skin, the hard map of muscle and bone. He learned the places that made her sigh, the places that made her arch against him. It was a prayer, a question, and an answer, all at once. And when he was finally poised above her, his dark eyes locked with hers. She was not afraid. She was ready. He entered her slowly, and she gasped, a sharp, clean sound of pleasure. He filled her. He was home. He moved, and the world fell away. And there was only the rhythm he created, the heat of the fire, the solid feel of him, and the rising tension inside her that finally, blessedly, broke. They lay tangled for a long time, their skin slick with sweat, the firelight playing over them. His breath was in her hair. Her heart was beating against his. After a while, the need returned. But this time, it was different. The slowness was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate hunger. The dam had broken. He rolled, putting her on top of him. Her hair, unbraided, fell around them in a dark red curtain. She looked down at him, at this big, wild man who had saved her, who had been patient, who had given her a choice. A slow, wicked smile touched her lips. She was alive. She was here, and she was wanted. She shifted, her body moving against his, and his eyes went dark. He groaned. Hope your lap ride's better than your saddle, she teased, her voice a low purr. His answer was a growl. His hands clamped onto her hips, hard. Find out! He pulled her down, his mouth finding hers, and this time there was no gentleness. It was intense. It was desperate. It was a claiming. She met him, thrust for thrust, a wild, wordless fight that they both won, their cries lost in the sound of the storm. Later, much later, the fire was dying. The cabin was growing cold. Josie was huddled in Levi's coat, even though she was lying next to him on the furs. She was shaking. Cold? He asked, his voice sleepy. He reached for her. No. She pulled away, scrambling to her feet. She went to the dying fire, poking it with a stick. This is stupid. Levi sat up, the furs pooling around his waist. Josie, what's wrong? This, she said, waving her hand around the cabin. Us, this can't last. It's not real. It's just a storm, and a fire, and two people with nowhere else to go. The panic was back, cold and sharp. She had let her guard down. She had felt happy. And happiness, in her world, was the thing that came right before the pain. What are you talking about? It's real, he said, his voice hardening. Is it? She cried. Or are we just convenient? What happens when the snow melts? What happens when you're tired of me? Or what happens when he finds me? The name hung in the air. Arthur. Levi stood up. He didn't try to touch her. He just stood, a tall, naked shadow in the dim light. I'm not him, and I'm not Wintry. I know, she sobbed, the tears coming now, hot and angry. But they are still out there, and this is a warm room. It's not life. Life is what's out there. He was silent for a long moment. He walked to the woodpile, added 2 heavy logs to the fire. The flame sparked, licked, and caught, filling the room with new light. He turned to her. His face was calm, his eyes steady. You're right. The world is out there, and it's full of men like them. He walked to her. Slowly, he put his hands on her shoulders. But they are not here. Josie, you are, I am, and this cabin, this ridge, it's a long way from anywhere. He pulled her against him, wrapping her in his arms, his coat and all. He held her tight. Nobody's coming for us out here. He said it like a fact, a law of nature, and she, wrapped in his warmth, his strength, let herself believe him. The next day, the world felt new. The illusion of safety was bright and fragile. They were lovers, now. They woke tangled in the furs, and they made love again, slowly, as the gray dawn light filled the cabin. I need to check the lines, Levi said, his voice rough. We're low on meat. I'll come, she said. No, it's too cold. The snow is deep. Stay. Keep the fire. He kissed her, a hard, quick kiss, and was gone. He was gone longer than usual. Hours. The sun had passed its high point and was starting to slide back down the sky. Josie began to pace. The fear, the little seed of panic from the night before, began to grow. When he finally returned, he was different. He didn't stomp the snow from his boots. He didn't come to her for a kiss. He entered the cabin, closed the door, and leaned against it, his eyes hard. What is it? She asked. Did you find something? Tracks, he said, his voice flat. A deer? An elk? A man. On horseback. Shod horse, not a stray. He pushed off the door and went to his rifle. He began to clean it, his motions sharp, angry. Where? Josie's voice was a whisper. South Ridge. He was skirting my line, looking. He passed through about 2, maybe 3 days ago, before the last snow. He's gone, then, she said, her relief a palpable thing. He was looking, Levi repeated. People don't just pass through here, not in this. Josie's blood went cold. He was looking for you. Levi looked up from his rifle, his dark eyes burning into her. Or for you. The fragile, beautiful thing they had built shattered. The outside world was here. Josie sank onto the stool, her hands twisting in her lap. Levi. What? The name I called out. Arthur. He stopped cleaning. What about him? He's the reason I ran. Levi, the real reason. Josie took a deep, shuddering breath, and she told him. She told him everything, about Arthur Prentice, the town marshal's only son, about how he was handsome, and how the town treated him like a prince, about how he'd cornered her in the saloon pantry, about how he forced himself on her, and how she'd fought, and how it hadn't mattered. I told him I'd tell his father, she whispered, her voice dead. I thought the marshal would do something. He was the law. She looked at Levi, her eyes empty. Arthur just laughed. He said his father already knew. He said that's what girls like me were for. He beat me, he and Wintry. They beat me to teach me a lesson. They kept me locked in the attic room. Wintry said I was damaged goods. Now, that I'd have to work off my debt in other ways. That's when you... She couldn't finish. That's when I hit Tom. I ran, not just from Wintry. I ran from the marshal, from the law, from Arthur. Levi was completely still. He had not moved. He had not breathed. He just stared at the wall, his knuckles white on the rifle. When he finally spoke, his voice was not his own. It was a low, terrifying rasp. He put his hands on you. Levi, he forced you. He's the marshal's son, she cried, as if that explained it. I don't care if he's the son of the president. Levi snarled. He stood up, the rifle in his hand. He was vibrating with a rage so cold, so pure, it terrified her. This was the man his mother's lynching had created, a man who knew, in his bones, what lawmen were. "Levi, what are you going to do?" she said, scrambling to her feet. He didn't answer. He checked his bullets. He put on his coat. "Levi, stay here. Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone." "Where are you going?" she screamed. "To check the ridgelines," he said, his voice a blade. "You're lying. You're going after them." He stopped at the door, his back to her. "No one is coming for us here. Josie, I told you that. I'm going to make sure of it." He was gone before she could say another word. The door shut with a heavy, final sound. She was alone. He had left her, just like she knew he would. She spent the day in a haze of terror. She barred the door. She sat in the chair, his rifle in her lap, and she watched the door. Every creak of the logs, every howl of the wind. Was him, was them. He returned at dusk. He fell through the door, caked in ice, his face a mask of stone. He hadn't found anyone. He had ridden the rage out of himself, but it had left him cold and empty. "Where were you?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Checking the ridge," he said. He wouldn't look at her. He went to the fire, stripping off his frozen gloves. "You left me," she said, her voice small. "I came back." He was distant, a stranger. "What are we going to do, Levi? What if they come?" He turned, and his face was full of a pain she hadn't seen before. A terrible, helpless pain. "Then you run. I'll hold them off. You run south." "Run! Again!" she shouted, her own fear turning to anger. "I'm tired of running. And you're just going to, what, die for me?" "If I have to. I don't want you to die. I want you to—" She didn't know what she wanted. "I want you to be here, with me, but you're not. Are you? You're already gone. You're somewhere else. You're back with your mother, at that tree." It was a cruel thing to say. She saw the blow land. He flinched, his eyes closing. "You're just like them," she sobbed, her anger breaking. "You wanted me. You wanted this. And now that it's hard, now that it's real, you're pushing me away. You only wanted me when it was convenient." She was crying, hitting his chest with her fists. A weak, frantic drumming. "You liar! You're a liar!" He didn't stop her. He just stood there and took it, his arms at his sides. He just let her hit him until she was spent, until she collapsed against him, her sobs echoing in the small, silent room. That night, she crawled into the cold, empty cot, alone. Levi did not take his furs to the hearth. He took his rifle. He took the heavy bar from the door and sat on the floor, his back to the wood, his face to the room. He faced her. He put himself between Josie and the only way in. He did not sleep. He just sat, awake, his rifle across his knees. Josie lay on the cot, watching him in the darkness. The fire was low, and the light caught the long blue barrel of his gun. He was not abandoning her. He was not pushing her away. He was trapped, and he was furious. And he was, in the only way he knew how, protecting her. Her heart ached, a heavy, painful throb. She had accused him of being convenient, but this man, this broken, dangerous man, was the only thing in her entire life that had ever been real, and he was prepared to die for her. 2 days passed. The cabin was a trap, taut with the silent, grinding fear of a trap about to spring. Levi did not sleep. He sat by the door, cleaning his guns, sharpening his knives, his face a hard, cold mask. Josie watched him, the silence stretching between them, brittle and thin. On the third morning, the sound came. It was not a subtle sound, a heavy, confident pounding on the thick log door. Levi was on his feet in an instant, his rifle in his hand, but not raised. He motioned Josie to the dark corner, behind the woodpile. She hid, her body trembling, the bone-handled knife in her hand. "Who's there?" Levi called, his voice a low growl. "United States Marshals," a man's voice called back. It sounded cheerful. "We're tracking a fugitive friend. Looking for a little shelter and a hot cup of coffee if you got it." Levi's eyes met Josie's. His look was clear. Be silent or be dead. He unbarred the door and opened it, blocking the entrance with his body. 2 men stood on the packed snow. They were not lawmen. Levi had seen their kind in every border town and mining camp. They had the dead, restless eyes of men who kill for coin. One was small and thin, with a face like a weasel. The other was big, barrel-chested, wearing a heavy buffalo coat. "Cold morning," Levi said, his voice flat. He did not move. "That it is," the weasel-faced man said. His name was Harkin. "Like I said, we're U.S. Marshals, tracking a woman named Barrett, Josie Barrett, murdered a saloon owner back in Laramie, Tom Wintry." Josie's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. "Murdered?" "Never heard of her," Levi said. "And I don't get many visitors." "That's funny." The big man, Pike, grunted. He was looking past Levi, into the cabin. "We tracked her horse this far, a fine bay, found it dead in a ravine, half-eaten. Then the storm hit. Figured she'd try for shelter. Lots of things die in the high country." Levi said. He began to close the door. "Can't help you." "Hold on now," Harkin said, and he put his boot in the jam, forcing the door back open. He pushed past Levi, his eyes scanning the small, dark room. "You're not a very hospitable sort, are you?" His eyes moved over the cot, the empty chair, the dying fire, and then they stopped. Hanging from a peg in the darkest corner was the blue velvet dress. Josie had washed it, but it was still torn. The velvet nap rubbed raw. It was unmistakably a woman's dress. Harkin walked over to it, a slow smile spreading across his face. He reached out and touched the fabric. "You said you hadn't seen a woman," Harkin said, his voice soft. "I lied," Levi said, his voice dangerously quiet. Pike's hand went to the pistol on his hip. "Where is she? Trap her!" Levi looked at the dress, then back at the 2 men. His face was a mask of cold, believable grief. "She's dead." The word hung in the air. Josie, hidden in the shadows, felt her blood turn to ice. "Dead?" Harkin repeated, his smile faltering. "Found her in the storm. Not 2 weeks ago," Levi said, his voice rough. "Wearing that dress. She was half frozen, cut up bad across the ribs. Brought her here. She died that night. Never even told me her name." Harkin looked at him, his eyes narrow. "There's a $500 bounty on her, dead or alive." "Is there?" Levi said. "A man could use $500. "So where's the body?" Pike demanded. "Ground's frozen solid. Can't dig," Levi said, jerking his chin toward the door. "Left her out on the ridge for the wolves. It's the mountain's way. I kept the dress. Figured I could trade the velvet for scraps." Harkin stared at Levi, searching his face for the lie. Levi stared back, his expression empty, his eyes cold as the snow outside. "I don't believe you," Harkin said, but his voice wavered. "I think you're hiding her. Pike, check the loft." "There is no loft," Levi said. Pike moved, shoving past Levi. "I'll check anyway." As he passed, Levi's hand shot out. He didn't grab the man's gun. He grabbed his left wrist, the one that was in a dirty sling. He twisted. Pike screamed. A high, thin sound as the bone snapped. Harkin went for his gun, but Levi was already moving. He slammed the big man, Pike, into the wall, and in the same motion, drew his own heavy Colt and pressed the muzzle under Harkin's chin. The entire cabin was suddenly, terrifyingly silent, broken only by Pike's wet, agonized moans. "You're not marshals," Levi whispered, his voice a rasp of pure hatred. "You're just meat. We'll go." Harkin stammered, his eyes wide, his hands raised. "We'll go. You'll go," Levi agreed. "And you'll tell whoever sent you. You tell them she's dead. You tell them you saw the dress in the grave. Because if you come back, if anyone comes back," he pressed the gun harder into the man's throat, "I'll bury you so deep your own mother won't know you in hell." He shoved Harkin back. "Get him out of here." Harkin scrambled, dragging the weeping, whimpering Pike by his good arm. They stumbled out the door and into the snow. Levi slammed the door, dropped the heavy bar, and leaned against it, his chest heaving. He closed his eyes. Josie crawled out from the woodpile, her legs shaking so badly she fell. "Levi, he's right," Levi said, his voice hoarse. He turned from the door, his eyes dark with a terrible certainty. "They'll be back." That was a lie. They didn't believe it. "And they'll be back with more men." He started to move, his rage replaced by a frantic, cold energy. He grabbed a canvas pack from under the cot and began filling it with jerky, dried fruit, and a block of ammunition. "What are you doing?" Josie asked, her voice a small thread. "Getting you out." He grabbed his heavy sheepskin coat, her coat, and threw it at her. "Put it on. You have to go. Deeper into the mountains. I know some caves. Up by the ravine. You can hide there. I'll lead them south. They're tracking me. Not you." "No." He stopped, the pack half full. "What did you say?" "No," Josie said, and this time her voice was strong. She stood up, her small body vibrating with a sudden, pure rage. "I am not running. Not again. Josie, this is not a discussion," he roared, slamming his fist on the table. "These are bounty men. They will take you back to Prentice. They will drag you behind a horse. They will kill you, or worse. You have to run." "And where do I stop?" she shouted back, her voice breaking. "I've been running my whole life. I ran from every bad foster home. I ran from men who wanted to own me. I ran from Wintry. I ran from Prentice. I ran here. And now you want me to run into a cave. It's about survival. This is not survival. Levi, this is hiding. I am sick of hiding. I am sick of being ashamed." Her voice cracked, and the tears she had held back for weeks finally came, hot and angry. "It's my fight. You can't just fight it for me and tell me to go hide in a hole. I won't be the ghost of your mother." The words struck him, a physical blow. He recoiled, his face ashen. He had told her about his mother, about how she had stayed, how her innocence had been no defense, and he had, in his own mind, been turning Josie into that same victim. "You'd rather die?" he whispered, his voice full of a terrible, helpless anger. "I'd rather be done." She cried, "I won't be chased like a rabbit again. I won't. I'll turn myself in first." "Don't you ever say that," he snarled. "Why not? It's the truth. I'd rather face them, face Prentice, than spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Or making you look over yours. I'd rather it be over." The argument was done. They stood in the ruins of it, two people trapped by a past that was now, finally, at the door. Levi looked at her, at the raw, desperate courage on her tear-stained face. She would not run. She would not be his mother. She would break, but she would not bend. He said nothing. He turned, took his rifle, and went back to his post by the door. The silence in the cabin was the sound of a world ending. That night, she lay on the cot, her back to him. He sat by the door, a dark, unmoving guardian, his rifle across his knees. Neither of them slept. She listened to the sound of him checking his weapon, the small, oily click of the mechanism. He listened to the sound of her, pretending to be asleep. She waited. She waited until the moon was just beginning to fade. In that deep, cold hour just before dawn, when the world is at its most quiet. She slipped out of the cot. He didn't move. He was awake, she knew, but he was facing the door, his entire being focused on the outside. She moved silently. She put on her own clothes, the ruined velvet dress, her thin, broken boots. She took the knife he had given her only weapon. She took one piece of jerky. She looked at his back, the broad, strong line of his shoulders, the man who had given her a choice, who had laughed at her jokes, who had held her as if she were precious. He was willing to die for her, and that was the one thing she could not let happen. She found a piece of charcoal from the hearth and tore a scrap from the edge of his flour sack. Her hands were shaking. She wrote 4 words. "Better they get me than you." She did not unbar the door. She went to the window, the small, single pane of glass. He had secured it with small wooden pegs. She worked at them, her fingers raw and bleeding, until one was loose. She slid it out, then the next. The glass came free in her hand. She laid it silently on the floor, The opening was small, but she was thin. She slid through, her dress catching on the rough wood. She fell into the soft, deep snow outside. The cold so sharp it stole her breath. She looked back. He was still there, a shadow against the door, guarding an empty room. She placed the note on the woodpile, where he would see it, and weighted it with the axe. Then, Josie Barrett, who had run her entire life, stopped running. She turned her face toward Laramie and began the long, impossible walk back. Levi knew. He knew the second the cold air hit his back. He spun around. The window, the empty cot. No! The word was a prayer, a curse. He ripped the bar from the door and threw it open. The gray dawn light flooded the cabin. He saw the axe on the woodpile. He saw the note. He read the words. A sound tore from his chest, a sound of such agony and rage it echoed off the frozen trees. He grabbed the axe. He turned back to the cabin, the small, warm place that had been their haven, and he brought it down on the table, splitting the wood. He swept the shelves clean, tins and traps scattering. He grabbed the chair he had built, the chair he had held her on, and smashed it against the wall until it was kindling. He was a storm. He was a force of nature. He was destroying the man he had been, the man who had been stupid enough to hope. And then, just as quickly, he stopped. He stood in the wreckage, his chest heaving. She was walking to them, to Prentice, to Arthur. She was his mother, walking to the tree. No, he was not a boy, hiding, and she was not his mother. He kicked the remains of the chair out of his way. He grabbed his rifle, his pistol, and every box of cartridges he owned. He didn't take a coat. He didn't take food. The fury in his blood was all the warmth he needed. He burst out of the cabin, saddled his roan with a speed born of desperation, and rode. He did not follow her tracks. She was on foot. He would be faster. He rode for Laramie, a man who had spent 10 years hiding, now riding straight into the law's embrace. He was not running. He was hunting. He rode into town like an apparition. The horse lathered, his face a mask of ice and fury. He saw the small crowd gathered in front of the jailhouse. He slid from the saddle before the horse even stopped. He saw her. She was standing on the boardwalk, held between Harkin and Pike, whose arm was in a sling. She was covered in snow, her face blue with cold, but her chin was high. Marshal Prentice stood before her. He was a tall man, clean-shaven, with cold, gray eyes. He was smiling. "Well, Josie," Prentice said, his voice carrying to the onlookers. "You led us on quite a chase. My son, Arthur, has been just sick with worry." He stepped forward, reaching out to touch her hair. Josie flinched, but did not pull away. "We're going to take you home," Prentice whispered, his voice a cruel promise. "We're going to take such good care of you. Get your hand off her, Prentice." The voice cut through the street, low, cold, and final. The crowd parted. Levi stood in the street, his rifle held loose at his side. He looked like death. "Who in the hell are you?" Prentice snapped, his hand dropping to his gun. "He's the trapper," Harkin yelled, his face pale. "The one from the mountain." "He's the man who's going to kill you if you don't let her go," Levi said. He took a step forward. Prentice drew his pistol. "This is law. Friend, this woman is a wanted fugitive. For murder. This woman is a victim." Levi's voice boomed, turning to the crowd. "And he is the criminal." "Lies," Prentice shouted. "Is it?" Levi took another step, his rifle coming up. "Is it a lie that your son, Arthur, forced himself on her? Is it a lie that when she threatened to tell you, you and Tom Wintry had her beaten and locked in an attic? Is it a lie that you, the law, sent these bounty hunters to get her back, not for murder, but to cover your son's crimes?" The crowd murmured. They knew Arthur Prentice. They knew his reputation. "You're mad," Prentice said, but he was sweating. "Am I?" Levi looked at Harkin. "Tell them, bounty man, who paid you, the county or Marshal Prentice, from his private pocket to bring back his son's property?" Harkin looked at Prentice, at the man's shaking hand, and at the rifle in Levi's. He made his choice. "It was him, Prentice. He paid us. Said she was a thief. He wanted her back." "Quiet," the crowd gasped. You bastard," Prentice snarled, and he raised his gun to fire at Levi. "I wouldn't, Marshal," a new voice said. The town preacher, Elias, stood on the edge of the boardwalk, holding an old, long-barreled shotgun. It was aimed at Prentice's chest. "I have listened to this town call evil law for too long," the preacher said, his voice shaking but clear. "I believe God ain't got patience for it anymore, and neither do I." The standoff was broken. Prentice froze. Levi moved. He walked straight to Josie, his eyes locked on her. He pulled the bone-handled knife from his belt and slammed it, point first, into the wooden post beside her head. He turned his back on her, his rifle still trained on the marshal and his deputy. "Cut yourself free," he ordered. "Get my horse." Josie grabbed the knife, her numb fingers fumbling, and sawed at the ropes. She ran, grabbing the reins of the big roan. Levi walked backward toward her, his gun never wavering. "This town is sick. You're all sick." He reached the horse, swung into the saddle, and pulled Josie up in front of him, her body small against his. "Stop them!" Prentice shrieked, finally firing his pistol. The shot went wide. Levi kicked the roan, and it lunged forward. The deputy and Prentice fired again. Bullets whined past their heads. Levi didn't fire back. He wrapped one arm around Josie, holding her tight, and rode. They thundered down the main street, past the shocked faces of the town, and did not stop. They rode through the night, into the deep, dark ravines beyond the mountain line, leaving the law, the town, and the firelight far behind. They rode for 2 days, pushing the roan harder than any animal should be pushed. They kept to the high, frozen canyons, where the snow was windswept and shallow, where the sound of a rock slide was the only law. Levi moved with a grim, animal knowledge, following game trails and dry riverbeds, never once looking back. Josie was numb. She was held in the circle of his arms, her back pressed against his chest, her face raw from the wind. She was an automaton, moving only when he told her to move. He was all iron and ice, a man she had never seen before. This was not the patient, haunted man of the cabin. This was the man who had survived a lynching, a man who had been running for a decade. He was a weapon, and she was just along for the ride. On the third night, the horse, noble and exhausted, finally stumbled, its leg going down in a snow-covered badger hole. It did not get up. It was done. Levi slid from its back, pulling Josie down with him. He did not curse. He did not waste time. He pulled his pistol, stroked the horse's muzzle once, and put a bullet in its head. The sound was flat and final in the vast, cold emptiness. Josie cried out, a small, choked sound. "We walk," Levi said, his voice a rasp. He pulled the saddlebags and the rifle, divided the load, and handed her a bedroll. "From here on, we walk." They walked for another day, climbing higher into the desolate, wind-scoured granite peaks. Josie's velvet dress was in tatters, her thin boots falling apart. Her feet were numb. Then they were on fire. Then they were numb again. She did not complain. She just followed the dark, broad shape of his back, a man who seemed to be made of the same unforgiving rock they were climbing, just as the sun was a red smear in the west, and Josie was sure she would lie down in the snow and never get up. He stopped. Here. It was a shack, or what was left of one, an abandoned miner's hovel built of stacked rock and rotted timber, cowering under a granite overhang. It looked as if a strong wind would blow it over, but it was shelter. He kicked the broken door open. The inside was small, filth-strewn, and smelled of pack rats and old despair. There was a rusted, broken stove, a rotted cot frame, and nothing else. "It's not the cabin," he said, dumping his load. Josie just slid down the wall and sat, her legs refusing to hold her. Levi set to work. He was a machine of survival. He found a half-rotted log and, with his axe, had a pile of kindling in minutes. He used the rusted stove, coaxing a small, smoky fire to life. It was a miserable fire. It offered little warmth and filled the shack with acrid smoke. While he worked, Josie just sat. She was waiting for the numbness to fade, for the fear or the anger to return. But nothing came. She was hollow. Levi stopped, his hands full of wood. "You're bleeding." She looked down. Her boots, the ones Wintry had bought her, had split. Her stockings were gone. Her feet were cut and bloody from the sharp rock. She hadn't even felt it. He crossed to her, knelt, and gently, impersonally, pulled the ruined boot from her foot. She winced. "I know," he said, his voice flat. He took a handful of clean snow from outside and began to clean the wounds. They were not deep, but they were raw. He tore strips from their bedroll, the last clean cloth they had, and wrapped her feet. "Your hand," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He looked at his own hand, a long, shallow graze, dark with drying blood, ran across his knuckles. A bullet. From Prentice or the deputy. He hadn't even noticed. He just grunted, dipped his hand in the snow, and went back to the fire. They had no food. They had not eaten in 2 days. Levi opened his saddlebag and took out his small medical kit. He unwrapped the cloth from her feet, smeared them with the last of his pine salve, and rewrapped them. Then, just as the last light died, the snow began. It did not come gently. It came with a furious, high wind, a wall of white that descended on the peaks like a shroud. In an hour, the world was gone, erased. The small shack groaned under the weight, and the wind screamed through the broken chinks in the walls, blowing smoke and fine, dry snow into their faces. They were trapped again. But this was not the cabin. There was no warmth here. There was no hope. They sat in the smoky darkness, the fire a tiny, angry eye. "You should have left me," Josie said, her voice dead. Levi stopped. He was trying to patch a hole in the wall with a piece of rotted canvas. He didn't turn around. "We're past that." "No, we're not." She pulled her knees to her chest. "You should have left me in the snow, back on the ridge. You should have let me walk into that town and get it over with. Stop talking like that," he growled. "It's the truth," she cried, and the deadness in her voice was replaced by a high, thin wail. "Look at you. Look at me. You lost your home. You lost your horse. You're a wanted man. For me, and for what? For what? Levi." He turned then, his face a grim shadow in the firelight. "I told you, I won't." "You won't let me be your mother," she shrieked. "That's what this is, isn't it? You're saving her. But I'm not her. Levi, I'm not some innocent thing. I'm not worth this. I'm not worth anything. Josie, stop." He took a step toward her. "No!" Oh, she scrambled back, her bandaged feet clumsy. "Do you know what I am? I'm the girl you buy for $1. I'm the girl you pass to your friends. I'm the girl you lock in the attic when your son is done with her. I've never been anything else. I've only ever been wanted for what I could do, for what I could offer, for what they could take from me." She was sobbing now. Great. Tearing sobs that shook her entire body. She slid down the wall, her face in her hands. I wanted it to be over. In that town, I just wanted it to be done. And you wrote in. And you're just like them." His blood went cold. "What?" he whispered. "You're just like them," she choked out. "You want something too. You want to be the hero. You want to save the bird with the broken wing. You want to save your mother. I'm just something for you to fix. And you'll get tired of me. You'll see what I am. And you'll... She couldn't speak. She just wept, a raw, broken sound in the cold, smoky dark. Levi stood, frozen. He had seen men die. He had seen his mother hanged. But this sound, this breaking, was the worst thing he had ever witnessed. He had taken her from one prison and brought her to this. He had taken her choice, his grand, noble gesture in the town. And she was right. He had done it for him, to save the boy who had hidden. He crossed the small, dark space and knelt in front of her. He did not touch her. "Josie," she flinched, pulling deeper into herself. "Josie, look at me." Slowly, she raised her head. Her face was a mess, streaked with smoke and tears, and a despair so total it stopped his heart. "You're right," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. I rode into that town for me. I did. I was that boy, in the woods, watching them, and I couldn't be him. Not again." His own voice was thick. He looked at his hands. The bloody knuckles. "But you are wrong about one thing." He looked up, and his eyes, dark and haunted, were so full of a raw, painful honesty that she couldn't look away. "I don't want to fix you," he said. "You're not broken. You're the strongest person I have ever known. You hit a man with a pitcher. You rode for 2 days, bleeding. You survived me. You walked back to that town to save me. You are not broken. You are fire." He reached out, his hand shaking, and his thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. "I don't want what you can offer. I don't want what I can take. I want you." She stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. "I want your voice," he whispered, his thumb stroking her jaw. "Even when you're yelling at me, I want your anger. I want your smart mouth. I want the way you carve that stupid lopsided spoon. I want all the things that are Josie, all the things they tried to beat out of you. I want your fire." He leaned his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. I don't know how to be the man you deserve. I'm just what's left. But what's left, it's yours, Josie, if you'll have it." She looked at him, this big, broken man, this killer, this gentle, patient survivor. He wasn't offering her safety. He wasn't offering her a home. He was offering her everything he had, his own broken pieces to match hers. She didn't say anything. She just leaned forward, into the circle of his arms, and held on. She buried her face in his neck, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and they just stayed there, kneeling on the frozen, filthy floor, in a cloud of wood smoke, 2 survivors, clinging to each other. That night, they did not make love. They just slept, a true sleep for the first time in days. They lay on the pile of furs, Levi's rifle at his side, and he held her. He just held her. The snow fell, and the wind howled, and for the first time, it didn't matter. They woke to a world of white. The snow had drifted up, sealing the door, blocking the small, broken window. They were buried. The light inside the shack was gray and dim, but the argument, the storm inside, had passed. They were quiet. They were calm. They were together. Levi dug them out. A slow, arduous process. He made a new fire. They had no food. "I'll find something," he said. He took his rifle. "No," she said. She stood up, her bandaged feet protesting. "Not I. We find something." He looked at her, at the iron in her spine. A slow, small smile touched his lips. "All right. We." They spent the day hunting. It was a slow, painful process on her feet, but she did not complain. He showed her how to walk on the snowshoes he had in his pack. He showed her, again, how to look for the tiny signs of life. They found a rabbit, just one. It was enough. That night, they ate, roasting the small animal over the fire. It was the best meal Josie had ever had. They lay on the furs, the fire a low, glowing ember. The silence was easy. Now, comfortable. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss of the cabin. It was not the slow, emotional discovery. This was something else. This was a kiss of deep, profound need. A kiss that said, "You are my anchor. You are my ground." He undressed her slowly, his rough hands gentle on her skin. He kissed the scars on her feet. He kissed the old, faded bruises. He kissed the pink line on her ribs. He kissed his way up her body, relearning her, reclaiming her, until she was arching against him. "Levi," she whispered, her voice full of a need that matched his own. It was slow. It was emotional. It was a promise made in the flesh. They moved together, a single, perfect rhythm, their breaths mingling in the cold air. There was no teasing. There was no desperation. There was only this Only them. They collapsed, tangled together. A warm, breathing island in a world of cold. The next morning, Josie woke first. She was lying on his chest, her head pillowed on his shoulder. He was asleep, his face relaxed, the hard lines softened. He looked, for a moment, like a man at peace. She watched him sleep. When he woke, he didn't move. He just opened his eyes, and they were clear. He looked at her. "Marry me," he said. The words were so quiet, she almost didn't hear them. "What?" "Marry me," he said again, his voice a low rumble. Josie pulled back. The old fear, the panic, was a cold fist in her stomach. "Levi, don't do this." "Why not?" Because this is not a proposal. This is a trap. We're in a hole in the ground. We're running for our lives. You don't ask someone to marry you when you're half-starved and wanted for murder." "Seems like the best time," he said, his face serious. No one else to ask. "No preacher, no law, just me and you." "Levi, I can't." He sat up, the furs falling away from his chest. "Why?" "Because," she said, her voice small. "I don't want to be the thing that costs you. I can't be the reason you're looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. I can't be the anchor that gets you hanged." She looked at him, her eyes full of a terrible, clear-eyed love. "I can't take your freedom. Levi, it's the only thing you have." He was silent for a long time. He reached into the small leather pouch he wore around his neck, the one he never took off. He pulled something out. It was a ring, not a gold ring. It was a simple band of hammered silver, inlaid with a small, imperfect piece of turquoise. It was Comanche. "This was my mother's?" he said, his voice thick. "My father made it for her. When they lynched her, they tore it from her hand. The preacher, the one who stood with us, he found it. He kept it. He gave it to me, years later, when I was adrift. He said it was my center." He held it out to her, in his calloused, scarred palm. "My freedom? It's not the mountain. Josie, it's not the cabin. I've been running for 10 years, and I have never, not for 1 second, been free. I was a ghost. I was hiding." He looked at her, and his eyes were so clear, so certain. It took her breath away. "I'd rather live 1 honest day with you, in a cave, in a gutter, in a town jail, than 10 more false, empty years alone on that ridge. You're not the thing that costs me. You're the only thing I've ever had that was worth anything." He didn't ask again. He just held out the ring. Josie looked at the ring. She looked at his face. She thought of her life, the cold rooms, the empty promises, the greedy hands. She put out her hand. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was too big, but it was warm. She didn't say yes. She just leaned forward and kissed him, a kiss that sealed the promise. They had a plan. It was a thin, desperate plan, but it was a plan. "We can't stay here," Levi said. "And we can't go back. East is Prentice, north is nothing but ice. We go west." "West to where?" "Colorado. There's a man I know, in the high country, Eli Stokes. I saved his life, a long time ago. A misunderstanding with a cattle baron. He owes me. He's a good man. He'll take us in. We can start fresh, new names, new life. But that's 100 miles, and spring it's weeks away. Then we wait," Levi said. "We wait for the thaw, and while we wait, I teach you." And he did. The miner's shack became a school. The anger and the fear were channeled into something else, into survival. "You can't rely on me," he said, his voice hard. "You can't rely on any man. You rely on you." He gave her his pistol. He took his rifle. "We're low on ammunition. Every shot has to count." He taught her to shoot. He taught her to stand, to breathe, to squeeze the trigger, not pull it, to be calm, to be cold. "Don't think about the man," he said, setting up a pine cone on a rock. "Just think about the target, the center." Her first shot was a flash of noise and smoke, and it went wide. Again. She shot, again and again, until her arm ached, until the smell of gunpowder was in her hair. She hit the pine cone. "Good," he grunted. "Now the rifle." He taught her to track. "Everything leaves a sign. You just have to know how to read. This is a rabbit. This is a deer, and it's limping. This is a man, and he's in a hurry." He taught her to ride. They found a pair of wild mustangs, thin and mean, and he spent a week, patient and silent, leaving them oats he'd had in his pack, until he could get a rope on one. He broke it. A quiet, firm battle of wills. And then he taught her. "No saddle," he said. "You feel the horse. You move with him. He's your legs." She fell. She got up. She fell again. And then she rode. She rode, bareback, with the wind in her hair, the ring on her finger, and the cold, heavy weight of the pistol on her hip. She was no longer the girl from the saloon. She was becoming something else, someone else. She watched him. He was a good teacher. He was hard, but he was patient. He wanted her to survive. "Why are you doing this?" she asked one night. "By the fire. Why, with or without me?" He was cleaning the rifle, his face in shadow. "Because, Josie, if it comes to it, if they find us, one of us has to get away, and I've been running my whole life. I'm tired." She understood. He was teaching her to live without him. Spring finally came. It came not as a gentle thaw, but as a violent, cracking flood. The ice broke. The snow melted into a torrent. The high passes, choked with snow for 6 months, began to clear. They were ready. They were thin. They were hard. But they were ready. They had 2 horses, a small supply of jerked deer meat, and a plan. "We'll follow the river," Levi said, pointing to the roaring, muddy water. "It's the fastest way. We can be in Colorado in a week." They packed their meager supplies. Josie braided her hair, tucked the ring under her glove. Levi loaded the rifle. He went out, one last time, to scout the pass. Just to be sure. He was back in an hour. His face was gray. "What?" Josie said, her heart stopping. "They're here." "Who? Prentice?" "No, not him. Bounty men. The same ones. Maybe different ones? Probably. It doesn't matter." "Where?" she whispered. "At the river crossing," he said, his voice flat. "The only one for 50 miles. They're not looking. They're not hunting. They're just waiting. They knew. They knew we'd have to come this way in the spring. They were trapped. The pass, their only way out, was blocked. The past was not behind them. It was waiting, just down the river. The plan was simple, and it was terrible." Levi spread his hands on the rough-hewn rock that served as their table, his face a mask of cold calculation in the gray dawn light. "They're waiting at the crossing," he said, his voice flat. "It's the only way a wagon could get through, the only way a posse would ride. They're lazy. They're waiting for us to come to them." Josie stood with her arms crossed, the bone-handled knife on her hip, his pistol on the other. She was no longer the woman from the saloon. She was a hard, lean woman of the high country. "So we wait them out?" "No." He shook his head. "They've sent word. There's 3 of them now. There'll be 6 by the end of the week. They'll start spreading out. They'll find this place. We're done waiting. You're done waiting." He looked at her, and his eyes were not the eyes of her lover. They were the eyes of a commander. "There's another way. A high pass. The Utes use it. It's a goat trail, not a man's trail. You can't see it from the valley. You'll take the Mustang. You'll ride west." The blood drained from her face. "You mean I'll ride west? I'll take the horse. What about you?" "I'm going to draw them off," he said, his voice just as flat, as if he were discussing a rabbit snare. "I'm going to ride down to the river. They're looking for 2 riders. They'll see one. They'll follow." "No." The word was instant, sharp, and final. "Absolutely not. I'm not leaving you. I'm not running while you... No. We fight them. Together. You taught me to shoot. I'm a good shot now. We fight." "You are a good shot," he agreed. And for a second, his eyes softened. You're better than good, but you're not good enough for 3 or 6 or 10. This is not a fight. Josie, this is a choice. You taught me that. I'm not choosing to die for you. I'm choosing for you to live. And what kind of life is that? She shouted, the old familiar panic rising, hot and acidic. A life without you, a life of me, alone, in another cabin, in another valley, waiting for the next set of tracks. I won't do it. Levi, I won't be the one you save. I'll be the one who stands with you. You are, he said, and he stepped toward her, his hands coming up to grip her shoulders. His grip was iron. It hurt. You are standing with me, by trusting me, by doing the one thing that is harder than fighting, by leaving. I can't, she whispered, her anger breaking, revealing the terror beneath. Don't ask me to, please. I am not asking. His voice was brutal. I am telling you, you are the one who has to make it. You are the one who has to get to Eli Stokes. You are the one who has to live. Josie, do you understand me? You live. She looked into his face, this hard, unyielding man who was her entire world. She saw the truth. He was not giving her a choice. He was giving her her life, and it was the most painful, most agonizing gift she had ever received. He was not a boy, hiding. He was a man, sacrificing, and he was asking her to be the one strong enough to accept it. She hated him for it. She loved him for it. Her shoulders slumped. The fight went out of her, replaced by a cold, leaden obedience. Where? She whispered, her voice dead. He relaxed his grip, his hands becoming gentle. He pulled a piece of charcoal from the stove and, on the back of a piece of rawhide, he drew a map. Here's the pass. You follow it for 2 days. You will come to a high basin, a single, tall pine, split by lightning, an old trapper's lean-to. You'll wait for me there. Wait, you're coming? Hope, bright and foolish, flared in her chest. I will wait until the last one is following me, he said. Then I will lose him. In the canyons, I know them. He doesn't. I will come to you. He met her gaze. Wait for me for 5 days. Josie, 5. If I am not there by the 6th sunrise, you ride west. You do not stop. You do not look back. You go to Eli. You give him this. He pressed his mother's ring, the silver and turquoise band, into her hand. No, she recoiled. That's yours. It's ours, he corrected. And it's proof for Eli. He'll know it. He'll know I sent you. He'll know that you are my wife. He kissed her then. It was not a kiss of love. It was a kiss of sealing. A kiss of desperation. It was a brand. It was a farewell. He pulled her outside, threw the pack on the Mustang, and lifted her onto its back. She was trembling, her hands numb on the reins. I love you, she whispered, the tears finally coming, freezing on her cheeks. I know, he said, his voice thick. Now ride, and do not look back. Do not. I need to know you are riding. He slapped the horse's rump. The Mustang, fresh and eager, lunged forward, taking the small, narrow path up toward the high pass. Josie bent low, her face buried in its mane. She did not look back. Levi watched her go. He watched until the trees swallowed her, until the small, brave line of her back was gone. He stood there for a long minute, alone, in the vast, cold silence. He was a man who had just torn his own heart out. Then he turned, a new, cold fire in his eyes. He walked to the other horse, his roan, and swung into the saddle. He did not go to the cabin for supplies. He had his rifle. He had his pistol. He had 20 rounds of ammunition. It would be enough. He rode down toward the river. He saw their camp from a mile away. A lazy, dirty plume of smoke. 3 men, just as he'd thought. New men, harder than Harkin and Pike. They had better horses, better rifles. They were professionals. He didn't wait. He didn't hide. He was a decoy. He needed to be seen. He needed to be loud. He rode out of the trees onto the riverbank, a clear, open stretch of gravel 100 yards from their camp. One of them, A man gutting a fish looked up. His mouth fell open. It's him! It's Cutter! Levi raised his rifle, took calm, perfect aim at the coffee pot sitting on their fire, and squeezed the trigger. The pot exploded in a spray of black liquid and steam. All three men dove for their rifles. The fight was on. "He's alone!" one of them shouted, firing, the bullet whining past Levi's ear. "He's alone! Get him!" Levi wheeled the roan, plunging back into the thick pine trees. He was not running. He was leading. He heard them crashing after him, all three, just as he'd planned. They were riding into his trap. This was his land, his mountain, his home. He had spent 10 years learning every rock, every tree, every shadow. They were just tourists. He dismounted, tethering the roan in a deep, hidden grove. He moved on foot, a ghost in the woods. He let them pass him. He let them ride past, shouting, angry, and blind. He picked his spot, a high, narrow defile, choked with rock. They would have to come through it single file. He waited. He was as still as the granite. He was not a man. He was a piece of the mountain. The first rider came through. A big man, on a fine black. Levi let him pass. The second rider, the one who had shouted. Levi raised his rifle, breathed out, squeezed. Don't think about the man. Think about the target. The man flew from his saddle. A clean shot. He was dead before he hit the ground. "Amos!" the first rider yelled, stopping, turning. He saw his friend. He saw the blood. He raised his rifle, firing blindly into the trees. The third rider, behind, panicked. He spurred his horse, trying to get through the defile, to get to his partner. Levi had already moved. He was 20 yards away, behind a different rock. The first rider was still shouting. Levi took aim, breathed, squeezed. The first rider slumped over his saddle horn, a dark stain spreading on his coat. Two. The third man. He was smarter. He had dismounted. He was using his horse for cover. He was a threat. "I know you're in there. Cutter!" The man shouted, his voice shaking. "You're a dead man. That's $5,000 on your head. Dead or alive, I'm going to be rich." He fired, a wild shot, into the trees. Levi was silent. He was moving, flanking, coming around. He saw the man, a thin, nervous man with a bright red bandana. He was using the horse well. Levi couldn't get a clean shot. Levi did the last thing the man expected. He stepped out from behind the tree. He stood in the open, his rifle at his hip. "Here I am," he said, his voice calm. The man in the red bandana stared, his eyes wide. He had him. He raised his rifle, but Levi was faster. He had been practicing this one draw. His pistol, for 10 years. His hand was a blur. The pistol was in his hand. And he fired. The man in the bandana fired at the same time. Both shots echoed through the canyon. The man in the bandana crumpled, his rifle clattering on the rocks. Levi stood there, the smoke clearing. He looked down. A hot, wet tear in his side. Just above his hip, it was bad. He felt the blood, hot and fast, running down his leg. He winced, pressing a hand to it. He was wounded, but he was alive. He heard a sound, a groan. The first rider, the one he'd shot in the coat, wasn't dead. He was pulling himself from the saddle, his rifle in his hand. He was a big man, full of fight. Levi raised his pistol, but the man was faster. He snapped a shot. The bullet slammed into Levi's shoulder, spinning him around, knocking him to the ground. Levi felt the world go white with pain. His pistol flew from his hand. His rifle was yards away. The big man laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. He staggered toward Levi, his rifle raised, blood pouring from his own chest. He was a dead man, but he was going to take Levi with him. "See you in hell, Cutter," he rasped, leveling the rifle for the killing shot. Levi, on his back, his world spinning, saw his pistol. It was 10 feet away, too far. He saw the bone-handled knife, his mother's knife, the one Josie had given back to him. He ripped it from his belt. The man took his final step, put the rifle muzzle to Levi's chest, and his finger tightened on the trigger. Levi surged up, not with his legs, but with his chest, his unwounded arm, his rage. He plunged the knife, hilt deep, into the man's gut. The rifle went off. The blast, a deafening roar in his ear. The bullet tore through the dirt, just inches from his head. The big man stared, his eyes wide with a terrible, final surprise. He looked down at the knife. He looked at Levi, and then he just fell. He collapsed, a dead weight, on top of Levi. Levi lay there, pinned under the dead man, his side and his shoulder on fire. He was bleeding. He was bleeding fast. "Josie," he whispered, his voice a broken thing. He shoved the body off him. He staggered to his feet. He looked at the carnage. 3 dead men. He was alive. He had to get to her. He pulled his pistol from the dirt. He found his rifle. He found the roan. He was so dizzy he could barely stand. He pulled himself into the saddle, his vision graying at the edges. He had to get to her. He had to lead the last man away. He had to be sure. He rode, not toward the rendezvous, but south, into the canyons. He rode until the world went black, until he fell from the saddle. He lay in the snow for a day, 2? He didn't know. He woke up, his horse gone. He was alone. His blood had frozen to his clothes, but the wound, by some miracle, had clotted. He got up. He had to get to her. He had to walk. Josie sat by the lean-to. It was the 6th sunrise. He was not coming. The 5th day had been a torment. She had paced. She had cried. She had screamed his name at the empty, indifferent mountains. Now, she was just empty. He was dead. They had killed him. Or he was wounded, lying in a canyon, freezing, bleeding. She had failed. She had let him go. She should have fought. She should have stayed. She packed her small roll. She had the map. She had the ring, which she wore on a loop of leather around her neck. She had the pistol. She was to ride west. She was to go to Eli. She was to live. She hated him for it. She hated this life he had given her. It was a cold, empty thing. She saddled the Mustang, her movements stiff, mechanical. She would ride. She would honor his last wish. She would ride, and she would find Eli. And she would just be. She took one last look, one last, hopeless look at the high pass. The sun was just cresting the granite peaks, filling the basin with a cold, golden light, a shadow. She blinked. It was not a shadow. It was a shape. An elk? No, it was a man. He was stumbling, using a long stick as a crutch. He was a black, broken shape against the bright, new snow. Her heart stopped. It wasn't. It couldn't be. Levi? The word was a breath, a prayer. She started to walk. The man saw her. He stopped, and he leaned heavily on his stick. And he raised a hand. She ran, her feet flying over the snow, her heart bursting in her chest. She ran, and she could see him now. His face was a mask of dried blood and dirt. His coat was gone. His shirt was a stiff, black rag. He was gaunt. He was beautiful. "Levi!" she screamed. He started to walk, faster, stumbling. He dropped the stick. He opened his arms. She hit him. She hit him so hard they both fell, collapsing into the snow in a tangle of arms and legs and sobs. "You're late," she wept, her fists pounding on his chest, her face buried in his neck. "You're late, you bastard! I got lost," he groaned, his arms locking around her, holding her so tight he was going to break her ribs. He didn't care. He was holding her. She was warm. She was real. I'm sorry. You're alive," she whispered, pulling back, her hands flying to his face, his wounds, his side. "Oh, God, Levi, you're shot." "It's just a scratch," he lied, his voice a raw whisper. "I'm all right. I'm here. Josie." They found their way to Eli Stokes. It took weeks. Josie nursed him. She hunted for them. She got them there. Eli was an old man, his skin like tanned leather, his eyes a bright, clear blue. He owed Levi his life. He saw the ring on Josie's hand. He nodded. "I have a place," he said. "Far side of the valley. No one goes there. It's yours." It was a homestead, abandoned. A small cabin in a high alpine valley, surrounded by peaks that scraped the sky. It was the most beautiful place Josie had ever seen. They built a life. It was a hard, quiet life. They were poor. They were hungry, sometimes. But they were together. Levi, his shoulders stiff but healed, built a forge. He was a blacksmith. He had good, strong hands. He made tools. He made hinges. He made things. He was not a destroyer. He was a maker. Josie became the heart of the valley. When Eli's daughter-in-law, a young Ute woman, was in labor, and the winter had closed the pass. The woman's mother came to Josie. You have quiet hands," the old woman said. Josie was terrified, but she went. She held the young woman's hand. She remembered Levi's words. "Breathe. Be calm." She delivered the baby, a small, perfect boy. She was the first to hold him. Her hands, which had been beaten, which had held a knife, which had fired a pistol, were the first to welcome a new life. They lived. They lived quietly. They were always wary. Every rider on the distant ridge was a moment of fear. Every stranger at Eli's store was a potential threat. The bounty was still out there. Prentice was still out there. But the fear was no longer a fire. It was just a cold rock in their stomachs. It was just a part of the life they had chosen. One night, the fire was roaring in the hearth they had rebuilt. Winter had come again. The snow was piled high outside, but inside, it was warm. Levi sat in the chair he had built, oiling his rifle. Josie came to him. She had been mending his shirt. She put it down. She looked at him, at this good, strong, quiet man, her husband. She moved, and she settled herself on his lap, straddling him, her arms wrapping around his neck. He groaned, his hands coming up to rest on her hips. "You're getting heavy," he teased, his voice a low rumble. She smiled, a slow, confident smile, the smile of a woman who knew, to her bones, that she was loved. She was no longer the girl in the blue velvet. She was a woman in wool and leather. "Am I?" she murmured. "Or is it just the chair?" He looked down at his lap, at her, and then at the big, heavy saddle in the corner, the one he'd found at Eli's. "You're sure it fits now?" She leaned in, her lips brushing his ear, her voice a low, wicked whisper. "Only one way to find out. The last time you saw them, they were riding. It was spring. They were on the high ridge above their valley. The wind a clean, sharp song. They were not hiding in the shadows. They were in the sun." Josie rode beside him, her hair, the color of a mountain fire, unbound and flying in the wind. His mother's ring was on her hand. Levi looked at her, and he smiled. They were free, not because the world had allowed it, not because the law had changed, not because the men who hunted them were gone. They were free because they had looked at the world, and at the law, and at the men, and they had chosen each other anyway. They had chosen life, on their own. Brutal, beautiful terms. And that, in the end, was the only freedom that mattered. Thank you for listening to this story from Wild West. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please share them in the comments in English. We love our community, so tell us where in the world you're listening from. And if you enjoyed this ride, don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories of the untamed frontier.